Imagine being rejected by every bank in America, and then one day becoming the man who owns the bank itself. This is the unbelievable, true inspired story of a poor black shoeshine boy who secretly learned the language of money while people ignored him. What started with shining shoes in Texas turned into a real estate empire worth millions until betrayal, politics, and prison destroyed everything. But even then, they still couldn't beat him. In 1939 Texas, racism controlled almost every part of life. For black families, dreaming big was considered dangerous. But one young boy refused to think small. His name was Bernard. Every day, Bernard worked as a shoeshine boy outside a local bank. People saw a poor child trying to earn coins, but Bernard had a completely different goal. He intentionally placed his shoeshine stand near wealthy white businessmen, not because he cared about polishing shoes, but because he wanted to hear their conversations. As bankers and investors spoke about money, land, loans, and business deals, Bernard listened carefully. He worked slowly on purpose so he could memorize every detail. The moment customers walked away, he secretly wrote everything down in a small notebook. Even as a child, Bernard understood something powerful. Information is worth more than money. He dreamed of becoming a banker one day, but when he told his father, the response was heartbreaking. In Texas during that era, a black man becoming a banker sounded impossible. Still, Bernard refused to let go of the dream. Years later, Bernard moved to Los Angeles with his wife, Eunice, and their children, hoping for a better future. Life there was far from easy. The family lived inside a tiny, rundown utility room owned by relatives, but Bernard promised his wife that one day they would live differently. He started working as a real estate agent and spent his days studying neighborhoods across Los Angeles, and soon he noticed something others ignored. Black communities were overcrowded. Meanwhile, many white-owned apartment buildings had empty units sitting unused. To Bernard, this wasn't just inequality, it was opportunity. He realized black families had money and needed housing, but nobody wanted to rent to them. That gap in the market could become a fortune. One day, Bernard discovered an old apartment building near a black neighborhood. The property looked neglected, and most people saw it as worthless, but Bernard saw potential. He approached the white owner with a bold offer. He offered part of the payment immediately and promised the rest after filling the empty apartments with tenants. The owner liked the idea, but refused to take the risk. As Bernard prepared to leave, he noticed a calendar inside the office from a local bank manager. Instantly, another plan formed in his mind. He went directly to the bank and tried convincing the manager to approve a loan, but because of racism, he was rejected immediately. Most people would have quit. Bernard didn't. That same night, the apartment owner called him unexpectedly. Instead of getting angry, the owner admitted he admired Bernard's determination, and finally, he agreed to guarantee the loan. For the first time in his life, Bernard received funding from a bank. He bought the building. Soon after, an elderly white tenant became furious after discovering a black man owned the property. She even called the police, but Bernard calmly pulled out the ownership documents he had prepared beforehand. The officers had no choice but to leave. Within days, the angry tenant moved out. Bernard immediately rented the apartment to a black family, and just as he predicted, the building filled quickly. The investment became a success. From that point forward, Bernard's business exploded. He partnered with the former owner, using a smart strategy to avoid racist barriers in business deals. Bernard handled the numbers and opportunities behind the scenes, while his white partner handled negotiations publicly. Together, they made millions. Bernard upgraded from struggling in a tiny room to living in a mansion with his family. But success came with new enemies. After his business partner died, the partner's racist widow tried forcing Bernard out of the company for almost nothing. She believed the courts would always side with white people, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. Standing inside a bank one day after another humiliating experience, Bernard looked around carefully. That's when a genius idea hit him. If banks controlled power, why not own the building the banks operate in? It sounded impossible. No black man had ever purchased property like that in downtown Los Angeles. But Bernard wasn't thinking emotionally. He was thinking strategically. He partnered with another wealthy black developer named Joe and created a plan to secretly buy the building using a white frontman named Matt. Bernard personally trained Matt in business, negotiation, mathematics, and even high society behavior. When negotiations finally began, Bernard had already calculated every financial detail connected to the property: vacancy rates, revenue numbers, operating costs, market value, everything.
The owner tried bluffing during negotiations, but Matt responded with exact numbers every single time. The sellers were stunned. Eventually, Bernard's team purchased the massive bank building for far below the asking price, and suddenly, the same bankers who once rejected Bernard now shook his hand every day. His strategy worked perfectly. Owning the building gave him power, access, and financial influence. Soon, Bernard and Joe began breaking racial housing barriers across Los Angeles by helping black families move into areas previously closed to them. But years later, Bernard returned to Texas and saw another young black shoe shine boy only serving white customers, just like he once had. That moment changed him emotionally. He decided he wanted to help black families in Texas gain access to loans and housing opportunities too. So Bernard and Joe bought a Texas bank using Matt once again as their public frontman. For a while, everything worked. Black families finally received opportunities denied to them for generations. But powerful people began fighting back. A banker named Florence Jr. secretly manipulated the system against them. At the same time, Matt became reckless after receiving control over another bank. Bad loans, government investigations, and political pressure started collapsing everything Bernard had built. Then came the ultimate betrayal. To save himself, Matt testified against Bernard and Joe during federal hearings. The media turned them into criminals. The government seized their businesses, and eventually, both Bernard and Joe were sent to prison. Everything they built appeared destroyed. But before the government could take every asset, Bernard had already prepared one final move. Years later, after leaving prison, Bernard's wife learned something shocking. They were still secretly wealthy. It turned out Bernard had protected valuable properties in the Bahamas before everything collapsed. Even after losing businesses, power, and public respect, he still found a way to survive, because Bernard understood something most people never learn. The game is not won by emotion, it is won by strategy. And that poor shoeshine boy from Texas eventually became the man banks could never ignore again.